Hey there, folks. Thanks very much for joining us for today's session. We are going to be looking at building real-time integration with Salesforce.com. So we're actually not going to be doing this in 30 minutes. This is actually a re-recording of the original live session, but we're going to try and compress that down into as little time as possible for your convenience today. The subject is real-time integration. So what you're going to need to be able to participate in this is you're first going to need at least a Salesforce developer account. Okay, so I've got one ready with some data already loaded. You can have an on-premise database or a flat file or some system that you want to reflect any changes into. And then finally, you will need an Informatica Cloud account, which you can sign up for at www.informaticacloud.com and get going with a free trial. Now, before I jump into the demo of what we're trying to do and how we've suddenly unleashed, I guess, real-time integration with Informatica Cloud, is to discuss a bit about the technologies that are being used. In the past, when we did any type of integrations where we had to reflect changes between various systems, we would always have an integration task, which is a data sync task, and that data sync task would pull through any updated objects or changes back into the original systems. Okay, now this is slightly different. With the REST API, what we're actually doing is we're controlling when that integration is actually fired off. So instead of relying on a manual execution or on a scheduled based execution, you're able to actually have that task fired off based on an event. Okay, now pretty cool part about that is instead of having to wait maybe an hour or wait, a specified amount of time for changes to be reflected, you can have those changes reflected instantly to all of the related systems. Okay, so let's jump in and have a look at how we do this. Um, I'm just going to jump into my Salesforce org. Okay. And the first thing we see is, okay, this is my Informatica Cloud account. Now, what I've actually done here is I've got a standard task that I'm actually using to build and to load all of the data into my Salesforce org. Now, I'm going from a SQL Server database into a Salesforce org, and I've got a load of data inside there. So if we take a quick look at what I actually have in there, let's open up my SQL Server. You can see I've got some pretty vanilla accounts available here. They're all UK based, and they've got various details assigned to them. And I've already mapped all of these fields into my Informatica Cloud account. So, oh, sorry, not my Informatica Cloud, my Salesforce account. So if we open up my Salesforce org, and let's have a look at the accounts, we can see that we've got a load of accounts currently available in here. Okay, and if we have a closer look inside one of those accounts, we can see all of the various fields have been mapped according to our integration tasks. Now, if you want to know how to do this part of the series, you can take a look at one of our other YouTube videos, which actually takes you through building a data sync service. Okay, that's not the topic of this particular session. We're going to be looking at how do you reflect the changes in real time back to the original system. Okay, now the way that we actually do this is we've released pretty cool little technology or little API, I guess, of the actual service. So everything that you can do through our standard web UI, you can now do through a REST-based API. What does that mean? Firstly, it's not a SOAP-based API. Okay, so a lot of folks get quite hung up over using SOAP APIs or SOAP messaging, as they can be quite heavy in terms of the frameworks around those APIs. With REST, it's very simple and very straightforward. It's really as easy as just firing off a URL, okay, and providing the appropriate parameters. Now, we've applied the same logic to our REST-based API, hence the name, and you are able to actually fire off integrations within Informatica Cloud in this manner. Now, there actually is nothing that you need to do to fire off an integration through Informatica Cloud using the API. Now, what I've actually done is I've built up a data sync task, okay, and if we take a look at this data sync task, I've named it send changes to database. So this specific task is designed for taking changes from Salesforce, excuse me, back down into my local database. Okay, now step 1, this is just a straight upsert. Okay, step 2, I've actually chosen the source for this data, so any changes are going to be coming from my development Salesforce account. Okay, step 3 is where's this data actually going to go to? So it's going into my Worlds Apart database, which is a locally hosted SQL Server database. Okay, now in my data filters, what I've actually done here is I've said, please give me any Salesforce accounts where the last modified date is greater than the last runtime of this particular integration task. Okay, or give me any accounts where the creator date is greater than the last runtime. So I'm ensuring that any changes that have occurred in Salesforce will come through when I actually fire off this integration. Now this is how we do things, or how we've always done things with these types of integration tasks. The difference is we're obviously going to be firing this off through the API. Now if we go back to step 5, field mapping, pretty normal. Nothing has changed there. We've done exactly the same as we would for any of our other integrations. Okay, and then for schedule, we don't actually need to do anything for this. We just leave it on, do not run this task on a schedule. Okay, so that is all you need to actually get ready to start firing off a REST based or REST or use our REST API. The next step is to set up Salesforce, okay, for actually firing off these events. Now, the way that you actually fire off events inside Salesforce is by using a trigger, and we can access triggers by first navigating to the setup view, okay, of your org. Now, before we can actually start firing off these APIs and making HTTP requests to different web services, there's one security hurdle that we need to jump over first. Now, if you've been using the internet or browsers for the last decade, you may have been familiar with a lot of security threats that came about for the last 10 years really, where cross-site scripting attacks were very, very common. So cross-site scripting attack is when one website sends the data that you're inputting to another website with the use of JavaScript or some type of browser technology. Now, Salesforce have implemented the same types of security controls, so it's very good that they've done this to ensure that not anybody could just send your Salesforce data to any website. Now, before we're actually able to use our REST API, we need to navigate to security controls, okay? And then we need to go to remote site settings. Now, under these remote site settings, we need to actually create a new remote site, and this remote site is going to be for our Informatica Cloud REST API. So I'm just going to call this Informatica Cloud REST API, okay? And then the URL that I need to use, I'm just going to paste this quickly, is the base URL of the Informatica Cloud web service. Okay, so what I'm telling Salesforce is please allow any HTTP requests to this domain. Alright, so that's going to allow Salesforce to call our API. So if you don't do this, unfortunately Salesforce will not be able to call the REST API. Okay, so you just need to save that, and as soon as you've saved that, it's automatically activated, and you can now start making use of the REST API. Okay, so our next step is to create a class that's going to be responsible for actually accessing the API, so then we can use it in multiple places without copying and pasting the code everywhere. So a bit of nice object orientation. So the first thing we need to do is navigate to application setup. Okay, then to the Develop tab, open that up, and then just hit Apex Classes. Now, under the Apex Classes view, we're going to create a new Apex class, and this Apex class is going to be responsible for accepting the parameters, such as what is the actual task that we want to execute, okay? And then it's also going to make the call out to the REST API for us. So just hit the New button under the Apex classes. Okay, now we're given the Apex class view, and I'm going to just cheat here and just copy and paste the code. Now, the code I have made available on the Pastebin website. Okay, so you will actually see this link either in the detail of the YouTube video, or it will actually come up on the YouTube video. And this Pastebin site will actually give you all the code that is going to be needed for creating this Apex class. So just copy the raw paste data. Okay, so we'll just drag and drop and copy all of that, and we'll drop that into the Salesforce view. Okay, now what's actually happening here? Now, the first thing we've done is we've declared a new class called Account Update Integration. So this is going to be an object that we will actually call when we want to use the REST API. Okay, I then defined a method called runJob, and in that runJob I have defined a username. So this will be a username to access the REST API. I've defined a password. Okay, that's the password of the user for Informatica Cloud, and then I have the actual job name. Now, the job name is the name of the integration task inside Informatica Cloud. So for this particular example, this job name would actually be send changes to DB. Okay, so that will be my parameter I will use when I'm firing off this job. Now, if we go back and we carry on and look at the last parameter, the job type. So the job type is to say, is this a data sync service? Is it a data replication service? Is it a power center service? And so on and so forth. So you can actually get all of these various values from our help guide. So if you just open up the help guide from the Informatica Cloud website, you just hit the help link, and what you'll actually get in the contents, just on the left hand side here, we've got Informatica Cloud REST API, and that REST API will give you all the details you need to actually use this API. So we're actually going to use the runJob command, and under that runJob command we can see all of the various parameters we're going to use, and there's our list of available job type values that we can use. Now, jumping back to Salesforce, okay, let's go back to our Apex class. Let's look at each line of the Apex class that we're building. So we're defining a new HTTP request, so this will be responsible for actually including all the details for the call to our REST API. We're then going to expect a response back from the API. So this is a way for the API to let us know whether the call was actually successful or not. Okay. We then need to create the request and set the endpoint. So what we've done is we've defined the URL, or the base URL of the API, which, if you remember, this is what we put under the remote sites section under security. And then what we're doing is we're building up the rest of the API. So we're saying this is the API for Informatica Cloud, and we're going to do a runJob call. And then what we're doing is providing all of the different parameters that we've asked for. Whoops, let's just open that up again. Okay, and in that we're saying, okay, give me the username, encode it, password, encode it, job name, encode it, and job type. Now, finally what we do is we set the method type to post, to say that we're actually putting these values into the API, and this is how we've designed our API. We're actually expecting a post HTTP verb. And then finally, we send off that request. Okay, now that request is going to get sent to our REST API, and then we receive a response. Okay, and that's pretty much how we actually make these calls. that really is all there is to actually getting going with our API, and the rest of the work is actually pretty vanilla Salesforce Apex coding. Okay, so let's save that, and Salesforce will just verify that the class is valid, okay, and it is valid. Okay, so our class is now ready. So now the next step for us is to actually call this class when something happens inside our Salesforce account. So we're actually going to look at a situation where if we hit an account and we look at Hamleys of London, what we actually want to happen here is if I actually edit this account and change some of the details and then save that account, I actually want that event to somehow reflect that something's happened. Okay, and I want to actually tell Informatica Cloud that, hey, you've got to run this integration and updates that Hamleys change. Now, we do this through the use of triggers. So to actually build a trigger, again, you've got to navigate to the setup view. Okay, you then need to go to develop. Oh no, not develop, excuse me. We need to go to customize, and then we're going to go and look at the actual account object. So we expand the account object and then navigate to the triggers view. Now, there's no triggers right now for the account object, so we'll create a new one. Okay, create new trigger, and now what we're given is just a short template of what type of trigger do we actually want to fire. Now, we're only interested in updates for this particular example, so again, I'm just going to jump to some code that's been pre-cooked. Okay, and I'll give you these links that will all be available inside the YouTube video. Alright, so let's open that up. And we've now got our trigger example. Now, if I grab all the code for the trigger example, and then we'll step through each line and give you an idea of what it is that we're actually doing with this trigger. So let's just copy paste that in. Okay, and what we've done is we've named the trigger real-time update integration on the account object, and we're only going to fire this particular trigger after an update has occurred on the account object. Okay, so this won't be fired if any other object is changed or updated or anything's actually created inside Salesforce. We're just focusing on updates for now. Okay, now the next thing is the actual account update integration class. We're calling that. Okay, and then we're saying execute the run job method that we created, and then through that we're actually going to provide all of the various details. So this is your username, okay, that you would be using. You then have the actual password of your Informatica Cloud user. You then need to pass in the name of the task. So I'm actually just going to grab the name of the task, send changes to database. Okay, so let's just paste that in there. Alright, and then what we need to do is choose the type of task that we want to actually call. So the type of task is a data sync task, so we just need to put in the DSS identifier. So we just, whoopsie, we just need to say DSS, okay, and that is pretty much all we need to do. We're now ready to go. So this little piece of code will actually be fired off every single time we do an update on Salesforce accounts. So I've now saved that trigger, and we're ready to actually fire off this task and actually see the real-time integration in action. So we've got our trigger, it is active, it's ready to go, okay, and we've got our Informatica Cloud task is ready. Alright, let's just have a look at our SQL Server database and just have a look at some data. So let's look at, we'll look at Hamleys, okay, and I'll actually update the country to be United Kingdom. Okay, so we'll actually see that change come through instantly. Now, this happens pretty fast, so I'm going to be flicking between the screens quite fast so you can just see exactly what's happening. So as soon as I go to my accounts, okay, and let's open Hamleys of London, and let's actually edit that the date and the billing address. So we'll say instead of England, we'll just put the United Kingdom. Okay, and we'll hit OK. Now, as soon as I hit save, that trigger will fire off. It'll call the class, which calls the REST API. The REST API will then call Informatica Cloud, and we should see that change reflected to my database. Okay, so let's do this. So I'm going to hit save, jump to Informatica Cloud, open my activity monitor. We can see send changes has come through already. Okay, so that'll take a few seconds to run. And now if we open my SQL Server database and just refresh that, we should see Hamleys of London should now be updated to United Kingdom. And we are pretty much done with a real-time integration. So that really is how easy it is to get up and running with this API. If you are interested in finding out a little bit more about that, please don't hesitate to contact us, either myself, Steve Mitchell, S. Mitchell at informaticacloud.com, or get in touch with one of our representatives around the world. Thank you very much.